Now, as well as buying a new camera recently, my Olympus Pen F in silver, I also bought a new lens. I say a new lens, but even though it was new, it doesn't feel like it's new because I've actually owned this lens twice before. I bought it twice before and sold it twice before because it's a difficult lens to get on with and I don't use it that often, so I kept selling it thinking, well, I'm not getting the use out of it. But I've decided to buy it yet again, third time now, and so I'm going to try and make the most of it. I'm going to try and keep it for a start, but make the most of it and work it into my photography. So the lens in question is the Olympus 75mm f1.8 aperture. So it's a 150mm lens on full frame, so it's a mid telephoto, and I bought it because my most telephoto at the moment is a 60mm, which is 120mm full frame. That's a Sigma one, f2.8, so a little bit slower, but it's a smaller and lighter lens. But I wanted something with a bit more reach without having to go and swap over to a zoom. This is when I'm out shooting with my primes. So this is the longest lens that Olympus do, but it's a bigger lens because it's a faster lens, got a bigger front element. So it's a heavier lens to carry around with me all the time. So that's why I was selling it all the time, because it's a heavier lens and therefore heavier to carry around. And if I wasn't using that often, it wasn't really getting much use. So it wasn't an overly expensive lens, but it wasn't that cheap considering I don't use this focal length that often. But it's a lens that's got to earn its keep now, but it's also something I've got to work a bit harder to use this focal length a bit more and make the use of the benefits of this lens. So today I've come to York, this is kind of my home city now, to try this lens out for the first time. It's my only lens I'm carrying around with me today, so the only focal length I'm using. So the benefits of this lens is, as I say, it's 150mm focal length, so I'll be looking for those kind of views to fit this focal length. It's got an f1.8 aperture, which means it's a fast lens. So not only can I blur backgrounds, but it's going to be great for shooting in lower light levels at this focal length. So there's the kind of shots I'll be looking for. Telephoto shots, shots where I can use shallow depth of field, and shots where this can be used in lower light because it is a fast lens, as they call it. That fast aperture lets in lots of light. So let's head off around York and just see what kind of shots I can get today with this, my only lens. So first of all, let's have a go at using this lens in low light conditions by going inside York Minster. So the idea here then is to use the lens wide open at its widest aperture, f1.8, which will allow me to use a very low ISO rating. I don't have to uprate the ISO because I'm in very dark conditions in here. Also, because of that, I'm going to get a shallow depth of field, so I'm looking for shots that can benefit from that shallow depth of field. So I'm not trying to get everything in focus, it's just small parts of the scene in focus, using that telephoto view. So isolating certain subjects and throw the background or the foreground out of focus. Now these lights up here could make an interesting subject. However, if we shoot them with this long focal length, but we also shoot them wide open, f1.8, but also shoot them out of focus, not even get them in focus, we get a result like this. Bokeh. So of course there will be certain shots that I can't get because the lens, the focal length is too long. Some of those shots looking up to the stained glass windows are too cropped in, but That's the same with any lens where you're using a single focal length. It's either not long enough or not wide enough for a certain subjects, but then you'd either swap lens or you don't shoot those subjects, you look for something else. That's exactly what I'm doing. I'm finding shots that do work with this lens and just ignoring those that don't. So where this lens is helping me is with the shutter speeds. Even though you've got the great image stabilizing of the Olympus cameras, I'm using the lens wide open so I don't have to push the ISO up very high to get nice sharp images, but at very low shutter speeds. So as I walk around the streets now, I'm finding the same sort of thing, that there's lots of shots that I can't do. I'm still seeing lots of shots I would have done if I had my 17mm or my 12mm wide lenses. Obviously can't do those. And there's lots of shots I'm having to ignore because the lens is just too long. Again, I'm having to ignore those. So as I've never used this focal length before or for a long time, I've got to train myself. I've got to train my photographic eye to spot those shots that will suit this focal length. Hopefully by the end of the day I'll be a master at it. So even though I'm using just this lens for this video, and I may do a couple of other locations just shooting with this lens, that's not going to be my normal practice. This will be part of my kit. When I'm shooting my prime lenses, it'll be the longest focal length I have with those lenses. But it's interesting to see a location I know quite well in a very different way. I'm having to look at it in a very different way to get the pictures here. So it's forcing me to see this location in a new light. And that is quite an interesting project. Well, next up we have the Shambles, or Diagon Alley as it's pretty much known these days. Probably the busiest street in York. So let's see if I can get a shot down here that isn't the usual touristy shot, especially as it is full of tourists. Oh, and interestingly for this shot, because I was shooting wide open at f1.8 and it was so bright down this street, my top shutter speed of 1/8000th of a shutter speed on my camera wasn't fast enough for that aperture to get a correct exposure. So I had to switch over to electronic shutter speeds, which takes the shutter speed up to 1/10,000th of a second, and I could get my shot. So next up was York Christmas markets. Busy, lots of people, therefore difficult shooting conditions, but with this lens, maybe I could still get some shots. Oh, and all shot wide open at f1.8. So next I've come to this bridge in the centre of the city. I think this is appropriate name, Bridge Street, but I'm come here to do some telephoto shots. So I'm going to stand on the bridge and just use the focal length to find the shots that I want to get from here. So I won't be shooting wide open, I'll be using some mid apertures, f5.6, something like that. It's all about the compositions that I can get because of the focal length. So onto the bridge and just see what kind of shots I'd get from here. I probably wouldn't do otherwise. Well, next up is one of my favourite views in York. This is the by Lendal Bridge, view looking across the river. Just need to line it up so you have the tower, don't know if that's a church or something, that tower up in the top of the picture, a lamppost and a little bit of a gap, and you've got that lovely sunlit wall on the left, a little bit of shadow on the bridge, that's fine. The ideal focal length for this shot on Micro Four Thirds is 75mm. Perfect. Now, as I have got a telephoto with me, I might as well do the other most famous view in York, which is that view down there from the city walls. View down to the Minster. You can either do it standard view with the telephoto, which is what everybody does, makes a great shot, get that one first, but because we're shooting with this lens and it's got a nice wide aperture, there's a more creative way of getting it as well. So this is another famous view of York from outside the art gallery. Telephoto view to zoom in here. Unfortunately, this lens is just a little bit too tight for this shot, but I can still get it if I stand back here, stand back against the wall here. I can just get a shot of it where it's just slightly cropped in, but it's still a good shot there. Well, this is a view that I've done many times in York. There's a nice little alleyway here leading up to the Minster, way above up there. A shot that I usually do wide, but obviously I can't today because these trucks are here and because I've got this telephoto lens. So even though it's not one I would necessarily go for a telephoto, because I have got that lens, I think there's still some shots to do from here. I just have to think a bit differently. Focus, focus, focus. There we go. So for what is probably my final location for the day is the National Railway Museum at York. So have I got any interest in trains? Well, no, none whatsoever, but I think probably there's some potential of some shots here. So as before, I'm going to try and combine all the advantages of this lens to get the shots in here. So that's the telephoto focal length, the wide aperture for low light capabilities, because it is very low light in here, and that wide aperture to get a very shallow depth of field effect. So let's go and see what we can get. So the other reason I got this lens is because of its shallow depth of field capabilities. Obviously with micro four thirds you don't automatically get that shallow depth of field effect. Everything is doubled, so the focal length is doubled and the depth of field is doubled. So it's good for getting maximum depth of field, not so great for getting shallow depth of field. However, this lens, because it's got such a wide aperture, combined with its telephoto focal length, is great at getting that shallow depth of field effect. And that's what I'm trying to make the most of. So what I'm looking for here is a bit of an interplay between some of the older locomotives and a new one. So this is an old one over here, one of the more modern ones down there. If I can zoom in to there and have this kind of out of focus drawn down to there, that would be a good shot. I think I'm also getting some reflection of the blue and yellow in the engine down there, so that's an added bonus. But long lens, wide aperture, shallow depth of field. I think that makes an interesting shot in here. Or I could go full on abstract. You may remember this shot as I tried to do this when I had my Polaroid camera and I came to here. Those are the colours, the yellow and the blue, that caught my eye. If I zoom in with this lens, I'm going to get a much more abstract shot. I wouldn't even recognise this being on an engine if you didn't know what it was. I think that could be a good shot there. There's the other thing I was looking for. A little bit of detail, a little bit of light, isolated with a telephoto lens. Perfect. The fast aperture of this lens combined with the image stabilizing allows me to get that shot at a half decent shutter speed. So did I get as many shots as I would normally do on a shoot in York with my whole bag of lenses? Well, no, but did I get some shots that I probably wouldn't have got usually? Most definitely yes. I wouldn't have got these shots if I didn't have this focal length. If my maximum focal length that I had before was only 60mm, here I've got 75mm, and that extra reach is getting me some shots that I probably wouldn't have considered. So it's been a lens that's definitely tested me. It's made me think about my photography a lot more to find those compositions, which has got to be a good thing, right? It's a little bit big and it's a little bit heavier than my other prime lenses, but that fast aperture I'm sure will come in useful many a time. But added to a kit of prime lenses, it will be a worthy addition, and there will come a time when it is the ideal focal length for that shot, for that composition I have in mind, and for that it will be worth carrying around, I hope.